Brajajanarayana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Gujabihari Jaya Radha Madhava Gujabihari Jaya Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Bhaja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Bhaja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Om Vishnu Pada Brahmsa Pivjakacharya Shuddhaswati Srimad Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Om Vishnu Pada Paramsa Pivjakacharya Shuddhaswati Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Grantha Raj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Nitai Gaur Pramanande Haribo Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 19, the Humsavana ritualistic ceremony, texts 14 through 17. So we'll repeat 14, and then I'll just read 15 through 17. Gita yuvam trilokasya varadau param eshtinau tata ma uta ma shloka santu satya mahashisha yata yuvam trilokasya varada parameshtina tata ma uttama shloka santu satya mahashisha yata yuvam trilokasya varada parameshtina tata ma uttama shloka santu satya mahashisha. Please repeat. Yata yuvam trilokasya varada parameshtina tatama uttama shloka satu satya mahashisha yata yuvam trilokasya varada parameshtina tatama uttama shloka santu satya mahashisha. So now I'll read the rest of the verses before going on to the word for word. Uti abhishu varadam srinivasam shriyasaha tani sa yopaharanam Dajvachaman nam archayat tastu vitastotrena bhakti pravena chetasa yagno shishitam avagraya punaya abhyacharad darim patim chaparaya bhaktya mahaparusha chetasa Priyastairupanament Parmashila Swayampati Vivaryat Sarva Karmani Ajna Uchavachani Cha. And I'll do the word for word for the one that we repeated. Yata, since, Yuvam, both of you, Tri Lokasya, of the three worlds, Vara Dao, givers of benedictions, Paramestinau, the supreme rulers, Tata, therefore, may, my, Uttama Shloka, O Lord, who are praised with excellent verses, Santu, may become, Satya, fulfilled, Maha Ashisha, great ambitions. Translations and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhagavatam Swami Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki. You are both the supreme rulers and benedictors of the three worlds. Therefore, my Lord, Uttama Shloka, may my ambitions be fulfilled by your grace. Sri Shukadev Goswami continued. Thus one should worship Lord Vishnu, who is known as Srinivas, along with Mother Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune, by offering prayers according to the process mentioned above. After removing all of the paraphernalia of worship, one should offer them water to wash their hands and mouths, and then one should worship them again. Thereafter, with devotion and humility, one should offer prayers to the Lord and Mother Lakshmi. Then one should smell the remnants of the food offered, and then again worship the Lord and Lakshmiji. Accepting her husband as the representative of the Supreme Person, a wife should worship him with unalloyed devotion by offering him prasad. The husband, being very pleased with his wife, should engage himself in the affairs of his family. Purport. The family relationship of husband and wife should be established spiritually according to the process mentioned above. Om Vignanacharamandasya Kinanjana Shlakaya Chakshamatamyana Tasmai Shri Gurve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Asani Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So Prabhupada gave a one-line purport to, as he sometimes does, some of these verses. Uh, but there are four verses that we read today. They all cover or reference different topics. So there's a lot that can be talked about. I'll be focusing on what my thoughts were when I read the first of these, which is the one that we repeated, where it talks about how Vishnu and Lakshmi are the supreme rulers and benedictors of the three worlds. Because the so this viewpoint is very different than the modern view of reality that we have. According to the modern view, at least in the West, implicitly, if not explicitly, people believe that the universe is the result and is governed by impersonal causes, impersonal forces. You have electromagnetism and gravity and all of these things. And if we go back far enough, all of the causes, uh, all the reasons that things happen is because of these various forces. And if you believe the scientists or put stock in the hope of the scientists, they say that they'll one day come up with one equation to explain all of reality. You know, this is what string theory was supposed to be, and loop quantum gravity, and all of these other ideas for a grand unified theory. Uh, they don't say that there is a, or they don't recognize that there is a supreme controller. So there is a person behind everything. Of course, Bhagavad Gita uh, concludes that this attitude is demoniac. It is the attitude of the demons to say that there's no controller. Everything is just the cause. Randomness, it's all about um, enjoying and conquering your enemies and all of these things. So, how are we to decide between these two uh, ideas? The modern scientific or so-called scientific view of impersonal forces, or the Vedic or Krishna conscious view of personal controllers, a personality that is controlling everything? Is it just a question of faith? You know, we have our idea. This is kind of how it's presented in the modern imagination, that if you have impersonal forces, then that's the scientific and rational thing to believe. Well, if you believe in God, that's just your faith. You can't prove it one way or the other. It's just, stories that are from, the Puranas or the Bible or the Quran or whatever. And you just have to choose to believe or not believe. Uh, but it is actually the case, I will assert and I will argue that actually our view is the scientific one. And the impersonal view, the view of the modern materialist, is actually faith-based. So I will today, and it's a bit different because I won't be quoting from verses and all things. I'll be presenting the scientific argument for the uh, supreme controller, an original person. So first we have to understand, what do we mean by science? Because generally people think of science, they think of people in lab coats and this kind of material, and also it has connotations of materialism, Big Bang Theory, evolution, things like that. Most people view these things as synonymous with science. But really, the kind of most basic definition that you could give is reasoning about the world using empirical evidence. Uh, so uh, we basically observe the world, whether just by looking around or by doing experiments, and then you reason about them. These reasonings come in various types. Of course, there's deductive reasoning. It's just using logic to conclude things. Inductive reasoning, which is saying, if I interview 100 people and 70 of them prefer vanilla ice cream to chocolate, then I can say 70% of the people of America prefer vanilla to chocolate. So that's inductive. But what is used in science the most is abductive reasoning. So I don't know if people have heard of that term before. Yeah, so most people have heard of deduction and induction, but not necessarily abduction, which is inference to the best explanation or most likely explanation. So you can think of, even though what Sherlock Holmes does, he calls deduction, it's actually abduction. You observe things and then you think of different explanations, and then you try to figure out which is the most likely. And this is actually what is done in science. This is what scientific argumentation is. Because we don't, directly observe, electrons or quarks or anything like that. So we can't necessarily use induction. And it's not like the universe hands us a ready-made list of premises uh, to do deduction with. So we look at the evidence and try to figure out the best explanation for it. And what I'm asserting is that the best explanation is that the universe has a personal cause, based on the empirical evidence, what we actually observe with our senses. To do this, I will argue for two empirical principles. The first principle is that order comes from intention. That if you see something ordered, that uh, that order came from a conscious, intentional source. And we kind of see this, we use this principle implicitly all the time. There's this book Uh, this case, Srimad Bhagavatam. Uh, and it has sentences in it that are very ordered. There's verbs have nouns and they're put into a certain order so that they can communicate things for a certain purpose. Uh, Likewise, this table was constructed in a certain way. So we understand that because this book, because it's not just random words, even if it was random words, we would expect the words to come from somewhere. Because they're arranged in a certain way, and because this block of wood is arranged in a certain way, we say there's an author and there's a carpenter, right? And even, historically, there's so many literary texts whose authorship is unknown. We don't, they were written so long ago, we don't know who wrote them. But we still assume that there was an author, right? Nobody would say that, uh, these books, of the ancient world that we don't know who wrote them, uh, just arose from random chemical processes, right? That's kind of a ridiculous thing to say. And of course, this is obvious in cases of, books and music and tables and things like that. But uh, people will, the materialist objection would be that, okay, these things, we know they're made by humans, right? This has Prabhupada's name right here. This has by, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. So we know that books have authors, but physics and biology, you know, does the cell have an author? Does Schrodinger's equation have an author? But this can't really be an objection because uh, that's what we're arguing about, right? You can't say, "Oh, we know these things don't have intention behind them," when that's the question under consideration, right? That's a case of begging the question or circular reasoning, right? X is true because I say that X is true. Uh, you're kind of just asserting instead of arguing. The other objection, which is a bit more substantial, is that what I'm, the principle that I'm saying is unfalsifiable. Because if somebody, let's say you come up to me and say, here's a system that didn't have an intention behind it, I could always say, well, there actually is an intention behind it. You just don't know who it is. Uh, and the objection goes is that any system that you bring to me, any seemingly ordered or any actually ordered system that seemed to have an intention behind it, I could say, well, it actually does. You just don't know who the intention is by. But actually, this is falsifiable. There are two ways you can falsify it, which is that if these sort of ordered systems are shown to occur statistically in a common way, basically that they arise naturally in a very common or likely way, or that certain simple laws lead to complex systems. Uh, so if a materialist was able to say either one of those, this principle would be disproven. But the materialist actually can't say those because these ordered systems are very uh, exacting and very improbable. This is what is known as the principle of fine tuning in the universe. So in the universe, there are certain physical constants that if they were off just by a little bit, there would be no galaxies or stars or anything. For example, the cosmological constant, which is uh, generally speaking, the energy of empty space. If it was off by 1 in 10 to the 120th, then then the universe couldn't form in the way that we know today. It either just all fly rapidly apart or all clump into uh, one piece of matter. To kind of put this into context, so imagine there's some cosmic game show host. He picked one atom, and your job or your challenge was to pick that single atom out of every atom in the entire universe. And you had to do this more than 2 million times for every second since the Big Bang. And if you guess wrong once, there's no galaxies. That's the amount of fine tuning that we're talking about. And that's just one parameter. So multiply that by the 19 parameters in the standard model, chemical parameters, biological parameters, and see, this is very unlikely to have occurred by chance. And then, as far as this kind of emergence theory, the idea that simple laws can lead to complex things, uh, there are some systems that people have constructed that show certain seemingly ordered behavior. If we had more time, I'd go more into depth into these things. But I only have an hour-ish if I leave time for questions. So uh, I'll just give an overview. Um, but these systems, they might exhibit symmetry or periodic behavior, but that's very different than the directed behavior that we see in biological systems, for example. Saying that something is symmetric on the left and the right is very different than saying uh, there's something like the eye, which is ordered with a purpose to seeing. And it doesn't even have to be like a teleological or like a existential purpose. It could be even evolutionary, of increasing fitness. The stomach's purpose is to digest food, the eye's purpose is to see. We don't see it from these simple laws, any model that can give these ordered, uh, directed um, systems. So that's principle one. Order comes from intention. Principle two is probably familiar to everybody, which is life comes from life. One of Prabhupada's most quoted phrases when talking about science. Uh, and, I've gave this example before, but we have visitors, so I'll say it again. If I walked up to any one of you and said, I was born from a rock, I don't mean that, my parents were, uh, solid and trustworthy or even that were emotionalists. I was literally born from a stone. What would your response be? Would you believe me? No, nobody would believe me, right? It's just a ridiculous thing to say, right? Uh, but it's interesting actually to see the parallels with the kind of atheist argument, right? Because the atheists say, oh, well, I can't see God. I've never heard God talk, so therefore I shouldn't believe in him. But none of you have met my father. None of you have heard my father speak, but you all know that I have one, right? Uh, so, uh, and the materialists say that, okay, well, I'm a complex system, but maybe simple cell. Of course, the materialist case is always maybe, might have, one day we'll figure out. They haven't actually shown anything. So, when they talk, or when they figure out, when they actually produce something in the lab, then, maybe we can talk about rejecting this principle. But, until then, um, we have to go with the empirical case, what we actually see, which is that life comes from life. Just on the point of them making life in the lab, they aren't going to do it, I don't think, by, just opening uh, valves of nitrogen and oxygen, putting some lumps of coal in some water, and then walking away, and then coming back and saying, "Oh, now there's life." The only thing that you'll create there is a lab safety violation, right? You don't even create even the simplest tiny cell. So all that they would actually show is that you would need an intelligence to design the conditions for life to come. So we have these two principles. Order comes from intention and life comes from life. So what does this mean? What are the implications of these? So just like all of you knew that I had a father, uh, because of I'm alive, so I came from a living source. You could probably also conclude that I had a grandfather, right? I don't think anybody will argue against the existence of my grandfather. It's likewise my great grandfather, great great grandfather, et cetera, et cetera. So we have this chain of living entities going back. There are two possibilities. Either it goes on forever, or there's some first member. Uh, and if we look at the laws of physics, if we look at matter, we understand that it can't go on forever, which because matter deteriorates, right? This is usually referred to as entropy in science. Uh, and if matter had an infinite amount of time to disintegrate or disintegrate, not deteriorate, then everything would already be disintegrated, right? If you have an infinite amount of time to do something, that thing will be done. Uh, so this chain can't be infinite. So therefore, it has to have a first member, an Adi Purusha, original person. So then the question becomes, did this original person come from an impersonal substance or an impersonal cause, or did the impersonal come from him? And here we use this principle that order comes from intention, right? Which corollary of that is that personal causes come from personal causes, or impersonal things come from personal causes, and not the reverse. So we can apply this as well to the Adipurusha, which is the that uh, as we see the impersonal comes from the personal, so on the cosmic scale as well, the person must be fundamental. So using these two principles, we can give a scientific case for the idea that there is a person who is the ruler and ground, well, who's the cause of all existence. You also can make cases for, a ruler who is Satchitananda and has all of these different qualities. That's a whole other class. Um, so if you, of course, oh, sorry, where was I? So uh, we've shown or argued that from these two empirical principles, we can scientifically say that there is a Adi Purusha who is Sarvakara Nakara, an original person who is the cause of all causes. Of course, these principles are empirical. I mean, they come from our uh, observation. So it's not a logical contradiction if you want to reject them. But if you do, then you're going to have real problems in the sense that you have to be fair, right? If you reject these empirical principles, you have to apply the same standards to other ones, right? So if you reject the principle that order comes from intention, right? You can't say that books have authors. You can't say that, let's say you're on a jury, right, on a murder case, and it showed that the defendant, lured the victim to a certain location, waited until they knew the victim was going to go on vacation so that nobody would miss them. Uh, then the body was hidden afterwards. If somebody rejected this principle that order comes from intention, they wouldn't be able to say that that murder was premeditated. Uh, an archaeologist, if they found, a site with buildings and urns and, uh, you know, bats and all of these things, they can't say, oh, there's a civilization here. It could have just come from random processes. Likewise, if life comes from life, uh, in the example that I gave earlier, when I said that I came from a rock, you wouldn't be able to say, well, that's obvious, because or it's obvious that you didn't, because that's implicitly saying, uh, that life comes from life. For all you know, I could have come from a rock, I could have grown out of a clump of grass, or jumped out of the pages of a book, or something like that. Also, more fundamentally, uh, if you're looking at empirical principles or the process of empirical reasoning, then uh, we have millions of examples of life coming into being. Every single one of them, uh, life comes from life, and in exactly zero of them, life comes from non-life. So if you set the bar so high to reject the principle that life comes from life, you have to reject every single empirical principle ever. You have to kind of just say the only things that we know are what we can reason from self-evident first principles, which is not a way that you can live your life. And then uh, kind of the other objection is that, okay, these principles might be true now, but we can't extrapolate backwards. But once again, you have to be fair, right? In science, we extrapolate backwards all the time. So if you say we can't extrapolate backwards from these principles, then you can't refer to anything in cosmology. You can't refer to anything in evolutionary theory. You can't refer to anything in archaeology or paleontology, some parts of geology, any of the, like, probably I could go on different fields of science. So if you reject these principles, the epistemological cost, the philosophical cost is extremely high. But if you accept the principles, then you have to conclude that there is a supreme being, a God, who we understand as Krishna, that is the cause of the uh, entire universe, and also beyond the universe, as we say, as we understand from the Vedic literature. Um, and this is a scientific conclusion. Of course, we can go beyond this as well, talking about the qualities once we get into philosophy. And then once we get to Shastra, of course, the personal pastimes and all of these things. But uh, I want to leave time for questions. So I will not get into all of that. Like I said, this is a bit of a different style of class, a little bit. Talking more from a scientific viewpoint than quoting Shastra and things like that. But I thought it was an interesting thing to go through. So hopefully people have comments, questions, additions, subtractions, objections. Prabhu.
Could you talk a little more about abductive reasoning?
Yeah, so the question is to explain a bit more about abductive reasoning. So that's basically saying, uh, it's basically inferring to the most likely explanation. So I kind of mentioned the example of Sherlock Holmes, right? Uh, you know, uh, he sees somebody has a spot on their shirt. And he says, "Oh, that person must have been in a rush today because he's eating his breakfast in a rush, and then he didn't notice the spot on his tie or whatever." So it's saying uh, that we have all of these different hypotheses, right? What is the most likely one, right? So uh, if I had a dog, right, and I came home and uh, the dog is in the house, in a section of the house that's not supposed to be, right? If I put him in a room for the day so he doesn't tear up the couch, uh, and then I come back at the end of the day and he's in a part of the house he's not supposed to be. One hypothesis is that some burglar or some person broke into the house, opened the door, didn't steal anything, and then left. The other is that I forgot to lock the door, right? You infer to the most likely explanation, which is that I forgot to lock the door, right? So we do that in science as well. We have different hypotheses, and then the idea is that you try to infer to which one is the most likely.
So it seems like there's two schools. One you're mentioning where comes from the personal causes, one where everything has an intention. This is a person, right?
Mhm.
It's like, what are the implications on science? They, if scientists had a personalist view while they were doing all the same stuff that they do in the pound.
Well, the question is, what is the implication for science if kind of there's acceptance of this personal view? Well, uh, I don't know about for scientists specifically, but for everybody, kind of next question, the logical next question, once you know that there's a supreme person, is what is he like? Uh, and then what's my relationship with that person? What activities should I do uh, with uh, in relation to that person? So yeah, and then from there you give him Bhagavad Gita. Uh, so yeah, I do think more specifically in science there'd be a lot less speculation, especially in these fields of fundamental physics. If I'm just being straight up, there's a lot of crazy speculation to try to avoid the idea of God. So you have, these ideas. I mentioned this kind of maximization of entropy argument, right? The reason that there can't be an infinite chain of material persons. To get around this, people have come up with, models where the universe bounces in between different, like it expands and then it contracts, and then when it expands again, there's no entropy and or cyclic things, or it gets reset every so often. All just speculation to avoid the idea of God. So they can stop wasting so much time speculating and do something useful with their lives. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess going off this speculation, I mean, I don't know too much about this, but um, within science, basically, like you have to do an experiment to get.
Not always. In astronomy, right?
Okay.
We don't do experiments per se in astronomy. We just look,
Yeah.
right? A lot of things with like paleontology and things like that as well. Look at the fossil record. So it's all about empirical observation, right? So that observation can be natural, or uh, it can um, be experimental. And there are advantages to both, right? Experiments, ideally, at least you can control for certain variables. But there are certain phenomenon which we can't do experiments for, right? It's not like you can make a star in the lab or a black hole in the lab. So we have to rely on observation. This is another point that can be mentioned. which is that rather unfortunate today that people uh, and even scientists have this view that only when an observation is made by a scientist does it count. Now, there are actually so many theories, hypotheses, um, like fossil records things, even astronomical things, that scientists didn't accept at first because the observations were just made by farmers and people digging in their backyard. They thought, who are these people? Why should they be allowed to make scientific observations? But no, everybody can look at the world around them and reason about how it came to be. Tarka Prabhu, I see your virtual hand is raised.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you for your class. If we suggest to an atheist that order arises from intention, they will typically respond with the example of the formation of crystals. How do we answer something like that?
Yeah, so I briefly mentioned this point. Like I said, there's all the points that I mentioned that go more in depth to. So this is the idea of emergence theory, that certain um, simple laws lead to ordered systems. Like you gave the example of crystals, and there are also other things that can be done. But we have to consider what actually we mean by order, right? Because the order exhibited in those systems it's only ordered in contrast to nothing, right? If we look at, for example, biological systems like the eye, is this the eye, for example, or the stomach, or these things are ordered towards a purpose, right? So even with simple laws like those governing crystal formation, uh, you get things that might have symmetry or things like that, but you don't get something that has function, and it is only good for that function. Um, Also, you don't get necessarily informational properties. You don't get something like DNA, which has informational or even computational qualities to it. So, yeah, there are simple systems that you can form, but you don't get the kind of complex structures. Nobody can show how you would get complex goal-directed structures that we find in nature from these simple laws strictly through emergence theory. So that would be how I would answer.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
I will, yeah,
What did you mean you said computational property?
of DNA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go in a little detail about that.
Yeah, so DNA, it's basically a code, right? A, C, T, G. And these uh, have uh, these code for certain proteins. Uh, Biology isn't my main field, so I can't go so in depth about things. But uh, yeah, like we look at it, it has a lot of the same properties as computer codes, right? It's a certain order that leads to certain results in the cells. There's even error correcting qualities to it, all of these things. So, yeah, there's lots of resources online that you can find for the computational view of DNA, of genetics. So,
One more question.
yeah, go ahead.
Um, so it sounds like a lot of the arguments that are made are based on principles that we don't know about. And if you dig deep enough, you see the principles they're based on. It's pretty easy to defeat.
Yes.
Prabhupada did that a lot of times.
Yep.
Expert. So based on your experience being a scientist, what are some tips for how to, when you hear an argument, try to find the principle that person is basing it on so that you can have a more fundamental argument.
Right. So the question is basically when you hear an atheistic argument, how do you basically get at the root? So because once you get at the root, it's generally easy to refute. Uh, the I mean, there are certain things that you can do. One is rephrase it in simple language. Because a lot of times people use this complex language to make themselves seem like authorities. If you rephrase it in simple language, you can kind of see how ridiculous it is. Uh, and another is to apply the same thing to different situation, right? So like I said, like, oh, consciousness is electrical signals through the brain. Say, okay, if I put electrical signals, through the speaker, will it be conscious? There's electrical signals coming through it now. It's not. Okay, what about the arrangement, right? And then you can get into these different things, right? Uh, and then, of course, there's always the big question: show me the proof, right? Science is supposed to be based on observation and experiment, things like this. Okay, show me the experiment. Show me where you can create consciousness from electrical signals. Show me where you can create life from chemicals. Show me where you can create matter from nothing. Uh, so there's some thoughts. There are probably other ones. Uh, but yeah, I think one of the biggest ones is just taking the argument and putting it into simple language. Because after that, uh, the flaw is usually uh, apparent. Uh, Also, kind of what I've mentioned multiple times in the class, uh, think about how their argument against your position is also against their own position, right? So basically, like, they have to be consistent when objecting to things. Like if they object that, like I said, order comes from intention, then, just because a murder seemed planned doesn't mean it's premeditated because it can't be intentional. It can't be sure. So yeah, those are just some thoughts. We have a few minutes left. If there are any other quick questions or comments? Okay. Srimad Bhagavatam ki.
And a lot of evidence being merged. Yeah. And lost. So I mean, the root of it's still lost. I'm sure there's still volume, it's still soft. I exist. Yeah, he was trying to draw. There's layer. Both fathers. If you pick it up from the that's so you start out. And that's why I call people. I mean, you philosophy. This is you eliminate the philosophy out of that advice. None out of philosophy. Truly, that's about the best offline. Yeah. I lost students understanding. I mean, yeah, at least you don't stay up so you don't get in where you smart, it's not dating, it's not underbuilding. It's my following for yeah, it's just nice and you know. If I'm here, it's on
Jaya Radha Damodara Damodara Shri Radhe. Jaya Radha Damodara Shri Radhe. Jaya Radha Damodara Damodara Shri Radhe. Jaya Gita, 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 Shri Radhe. Jaya Lalita, Vishaka Lalita, Vishaka Shri Radhe. Jaya Vitai, Gora Sundar, Vitai, Gora Sundar, Gora Hari. Jai Nitai, Gora Sundar, Nitai, Gora Sundar, Gora Hari. Jai Nitai, Gora Sundar, Nitai, Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Jai Jai Prabhupada, Jai Jai Prabhupada, Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Jai Jai Prabhupada, Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Jai Jai Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya 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 Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya 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 Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya 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 Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Sri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhartati Satma. Sri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhartati Satma.
Krishna 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 starting. Nagari, Srimad, Bhagavatam, just understand what Bhagavatam. Shalom, Bhagavatam, Gagamai, Salvation for the Bhakta in the kingdom, time for privilege day. All verse 740, verse 740, all verse 740, verse 62, and Gaura Kashyap Prabhupada. Let's see what you know. I'm doing. And the last time, another kind of. We have time, good. We just switch up the sky. Our oh, master conversion. Good shade. Jehovah,
Radha, Radha, Sri Radhe, Radhe, Radhe,